Are you trying to dominate your fantasy football league? Do you want so many championship rings it's impossible to sign autographs? Well, crack open a beer, pour yourself a glass of bourbon, and settle in, because you've come to the right place. Welcome to Hammercast.
Hey guys, welcome to this week's episode of the Dynasty Debates series that I'm doing, being brought to you guys by the Hammercast Network. I'm your host, Calvin Timms, and this week I have a great guest with me, Dave Heilman of the Dynasty Dorks podcast. And if you guys missed it, last week we talked about Clyde Edwards-Helaire versus Joe Mixon. Who would you rather have in Dynasty? This week, I thought I'd flip it up a little bit and talk about the wide receivers, two young studs that are the top of everyone's draft board right now. It seems like Justin Jefferson and A.J. Brown. I'm going to be talking about the pro A.J. Brown side. Dave's going to be laying out the pro Justin Jefferson side. And the format of this debate is going to be pretty simple. Dave's going to go first. He's going to lay out why he thinks you should take Justin Jefferson over A.J. Brown. Then I'm going to follow up, give my reasons for A.J. Brown, and then we're going to have a little bit of back and forth. And ultimately, you guys get to decide who wins this debate. Dave, you ready to get this thing started?
Absolutely. Let's go.
All right. Give me your reasons why you would take Justin Jefferson over A.J. Brown.
Yeah, so this is a tough one. With Justin Jefferson, what he did last year is, completely – it's a case study. You had no offseason due to COVID. He had a slow start to the season, and he's on a low pass volume offense, and he broke the rookie receiving record. And what I thought was most impressive about what he did was the consistency and what he did. He not only had Adam Thielen on the field, Irv Smith had a mini breakout. And again, this is a low pass volume offense, and he just consistently performed. He had almost 18 points per game in PPR. And when you're talking about receivers, historically, rookie receivers, they don't do anything. And when you talk about your guy, A.J. Brown, you couldn't really start A.J. Brown, his rookie year, until the playoffs. He had week 3 and I think maybe week 12, he had a good game. But most of his points came on that week 12 to week 16, week 17 breakout for A.J. Brown. So a lot of people remember him for having this fantastic rookie season. But if you look back at the game-by-game production, he really only had 5 or 6 good games. While Justin Jefferson, pretty much after the first 2 games, he had, I think, 3 catches and 2 catches. He finished the season with 12 or 13 wide receiver 1 performances. And again, he broke the rookie record with basically no offseason. And he's younger than A.J. Brown. And one concern going into last year was A.J. Brown had 2 surgeries, both on both knees. He had surgery on both knees before the season. And at week 2 last year, they were talking about shutting him down. Mm-hmm. So someone that plays as physical as he does with, I wouldn't say a huge injury history, but knee surgeries are not a good thing. Justin Jefferson, you're younger, 2 less knee surgeries. Give me Justin Jefferson.
All right, fair enough. So my whole thing with A.J. Brown, first off, I got to start with the fact that if you have – everybody knows Michael Thomas on Twitter, one of the worst Twitter follows because he just complains all the time, right? Well, A.J. Brown is one of the best Twitter follows. It's impossible not to like this guy. You go see anything he does. And I know this is a terrible argument for fantasy, but – it just shows how good he is, right? If you can root for him, it makes you want him to do better. But in terms of the fantasy and the football production side of things, you're right that he did start a little bit softer in his rookie season. But in 2020, he played injured. He played the first 4 weeks recovering from injury, and he was still a monster in terms of per game basis and end of season rankings. Justin Jefferson did extremely well, especially for a rookie, because like you said, it's not very common that they do extremely well. But A.J. Brown was keeping pace with him on the same type of offense. Both of them are low pass volume, high rushing efficiency, and both with quarterbacks that you're not really thrilled about from a real life football standpoint, but for fantasy, they're perfectly fine. So A.J. Brown was doing just fine. And the biggest thing that I love about A.J. Brown this year, Corey Davis is gone. Jonnu Smith is gone. Who's gone from Minnesota for Justin Jefferson? His targets aren't really going to be going up much higher, in my opinion. But A.J. Brown has 157 total targets that have been vacated for the Titans. They're probably going to bring in a wide receiver either in the first or the second round of the draft this year. But I'm not going to say that either one of those guys is going to steal a ton of targets. I think A.J. Brown, if he could get anywhere near the target volume that Justin Jefferson got, I think that he would be just as good, if not better. And when it comes to the skill sets of these two guys, like you said, A.J. Brown is a very physical kind of guy. He's bigger than Justin Jefferson. He's like a freak. I actually saw him live at the Combine. I lived in Indiana for most of my life, and I used to be able to go to the Combine down in Indy, and I saw him and DK Metcalf live for the wide receivers that day, and that was awesome. It was so good. And he wowed me even at the Combine. So he's a big dude, and he plays extremely physical, and he is extremely athletic for his size. That's why I think he's a little bit more of a touchdown threat. He's had more touchdowns on average than Justin Jefferson has. Justin Jefferson, he's more of a shifty kind of slot player to me, and A.J. Brown is more the prototypical outside wide receiver who's going to be a much higher touchdown threat year to year. So that said, if you combine all of that, the uptick in targets, the uptick in probably touchdowns just because of how explosive he is, I think that there's a very easy chance for A.J. Brown to finish as even the wide receiver one. That's how high I think his ceiling is. And he is a little bit older than Justin Jefferson, but I think it's only like 1 year. And they're both like 22, 23, right in there. So you could have these guys for the next decade if you're lucky. So I get this. I get the argument. What do you think about my A.J. Brown points?
Yeah, no, and A.J. Brown is definitely an easy person to cheer for and an easy person to convince people to draft. And with the targets vacated, it was actually 224 targets if you include Adam Humphries and Jonnu Smith. So they had almost 50% of their targets gone. So obviously not all of those, or hopefully not all of those, go to Josh Reynolds. We assume a rookie comes in. And A.J. Brown has been pretty efficient with what he's got. Mm-hmm. He's only received 9+ targets in 5 games. And in those 5 games, he's produced at a 16-game pace of 115 catches, 1,792 yards, and 16 touchdowns. That's 390 points. It's 24 points a game. Super efficient, and if he gets those targets, you think the efficiency is going to go down. It hasn't. Not only are they missing that third most vacated targets, the second most red zone targets. So 15 red zone targets are going to be available. So A.J. Brown, as far as the short term, I think probably is the better play. For me, Justin Jefferson's the longer play. And the reason for that is, as I said before, with A.J. Brown being such a physical player and having some surgeries, the situation obviously could change. They could bring in somebody as far as receivers and things like that. So the vacated target thing isn't necessarily long term. But with Jefferson, that's why I think he's the long term play. But this year, 100% agree. A.J. Brown could be the wide receiver 1 overall.
Fair enough. So the interesting thing that I think is I saw that you put out a poll on Twitter recently, and I didn't see that final result. I saw it when it was after you had put it out, kind of in the interim of it. How did it end? Did it end with A.J. Brown being the more popular pick?
Let me look it up.
All right. And the reason why I find this interesting, because I believe A.J. Brown finished higher than Justin Jefferson, who you'd rather own. The community, that's what they said. The reason why I find it so interesting is because Justin Jefferson, in all of the startups and all of the mock drafts that I've done this offseason, has gone before A.J. Brown. He's the one that everyone seems to be grabbing. But when you talk to people, they're kind of more interested in A.J. Brown. So it's kind of a interesting dynamic. Why is Justin Jefferson going so much higher than A.J. Brown if people want A.J. Brown more? So that's the reason why I think it's a very interesting topic, for one. And then for two, the biggest issue that I have with Justin Jefferson, do you think that people are buying him at his ceiling right now? Because 1,400 yards, that is extremely impressive. But is it repeatable year to year? You know what I mean? Do you think that he's going to be able to put up that much? And that's we'll say per game, because I know it's going to 17 games this year, so that's going to change the average every year now. But are people buying him too highly right now?
Yeah, I mean, the same could probably be said about both of them. In regards to April ADP, Justin Jefferson is the number 1 dynasty wide receiver coming off the board according to Dynasty League Football, but A.J. Brown's number 2. So they're both at the 8 average, so at the end of the first round. So you have Justin Jefferson at 8.3, and you have A.J. Brown at 8.67.
Really? Okay.
In the draft that I did this morning, I had Justin Jefferson and A.J. Brown go back-to-back as far as the receivers. Justin Jefferson went first. I was able to get A.J. Brown. So if you have to settle for A.J. Brown, that's not a bad thing.
See, that's interesting, again, because I've done quite a few actual drafts this year of startups, and I got A.J. Brown in a lot of them because I was always able to grab him at the end of the second, not around 8, like at the end of the second, which is, to me, it's just such a crazy drop. I mean, there's still people like that take Adams and Hill over him, but which I totally understand. But when you're talking, Justin Jefferson is usually the number 1 or number 2 just off the board almost universally. So I'm just a little nervous about that because, again, it's no rumor that the Minnesota Vikings have kind of talked about shopping Kirk Cousins, potentially bringing someone in here in the next couple of years. If they continue that run-heavy scheme that they got going on over there, is he going to be able to see that same target percentage, the same efficiency with those catches? 1,400 yards is a lot. He might see a little bit of an uptick in touchdowns. He wasn't that high for the number of yardage that he had in terms of touchdowns. So you could see an uptick there, but the yardage is what kind of concerns me a little bit in terms of fantasy.
Yeah. And like you said earlier, these are very similar offenses. We don't know what the offense is going to look like in Tennessee with Arthur Smith leaving and them getting a new offensive coordinator. So it may look a little different, and maybe they do have more passing. Maybe they stay the same. It's still the same head coach. And with Minnesota, they've had different offensive coordinators. And every time Mike Zimmer always rules with an iron fist, and they like to run the ball. And if not, DeFilippo got fired.
Right.
So they're going to continue to run the ball, and they're continue to have lower passing volume, and they run 12 personnel quite a bit. So there's typically 2 receivers out there instead of 3, and there's 2 tight ends out there, which obviously has been successful for them, and it's been successful for the tight ends, the Titans, because that's what they did as well. So for me, I think that the yardage may go down, but like you said, we could see an uptick in touchdowns because that's quite a lot of yards for only 7 touchdowns. And with A.J. Brown was almost the opposite. He only, had a little over 1,000 yards, but he had 11 touchdowns.
Right.
So, I definitely, like I said, I agree that A.J. Brown is screaming value when it comes to if he's the 6th or 7th receiver off the board in your draft. Mm-hmm. He's got wide receiver 1 potential, but he's got 1 overall potential.
Right.
And Justin Jefferson, if you're buying him at wide receiver 1 overall, there is no other ceiling. Like that is the ceiling.
Right.
So to your point, if you're paying wide receiver 1 money for anybody, they got to end up being the wide receiver 1 or you else.
If you could switch Justin Jefferson where he's going with where CeeDee Lamb is going in drafts, to me it'd be no question, right? But it's just that's the biggest fear with me. And I say this like I'm hating on Justin Jefferson. I love him. He's number 5 right now in my overall rankings, where I have A.J. Brown number 3, right? So it's not like I have him massively down my board or anything like that. And that's the one thing with these debates. You always have to be careful that people can kind of take it as, oh, you don't like this player, right? I love Justin Jefferson. I was high on him last year before the draft. He outperformed all of my expectations, but I am just a little concerned with what his ceiling could be versus what you're paying for him, right? And that goes for trades and everything right now. I just don't know if you're going to be able to get the value for Justin Jefferson that you could for someone like A.J. Brown, who people love, but at the same time, they're more willing to move him for some reason. I don't know why. I don't really get it personally, but he does seem like the easier one of the two to get right now in the offseason. So,
yeah, no, I agree with that 100%. Like I said, I ended up having to get A.J. Brown when both were on the board. But yeah, no, it's a great point in regards to, you don't hate the player, you just hate the value. So if
right.
The player is, you're having to pay the 101, then they better finish as the 101 or
right.
it's a loss. If you're getting in the 6th or 7th or 8th round, if they have a good season or an okay season, it's not that not that big a deal. But
right,
yeah, if you're able to get a guy in the 2nd or 3rd round and he can return 1st round value, it makes so much sense, because in the 1st round they have to return value or it's a loss. So yeah, if you can get AJ Brown at a discount compared to Justin Jefferson, then that's a deal breaker for me.
Fair enough. So, all right, well, that was a pretty good discussion, I think, on both sides. I think that you laid out a pretty good argument for Justin Jefferson. I think that the efficiency concerns that I have may not be as warranted as maybe I think that they are. Maybe Justin Jefferson can finish with similar stats as what he had last year, and you laid out a good case for that. And then A.J. Brown, he does seem to be a massive value right now in your startup. So let us know what you guys think. Who do you think won this debate as we go into this season in 2021? So please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the video down below. It's just going to help us with the algorithm, get the video out to more people. But thank you guys so much for listening. Again, I'm your host, Calvin Timms. Find me over on Twitter at TDC_Calvin or Dave at Dynasty Dorks. Be sure to give us a follow over there. And what kind of content you got coming up here in the next couple weeks?
Yeah, so we have our NFL Draft Watch Show. So Kevin's going to actually be on it. So
great.
It's going to be an open link, so anyone out there can join. We also have an NFL mock draft contest. We've been giving away a jersey. We got a few sponsors and giveaways to the show. So stop by Dynasty Dorks Fantasy Football YouTube Live to watch the draft with us.
Awesome. Who's your favorite team?
Giants.
Who are you hoping they take?
Man, I don't know. I hope they trade back, but yeah, we'll see. If they can go get a lineman, then I'll be happy, or an edge rusher. But I want to trade back for an edge rusher and not reach for one. But
yeah, this is a dangerous class for the edge rushers. So
yeah,
we'll see.
If you're paying a pick 11 for an edge rusher, then we just talked about buying high.
Right,
you're buying high. But if Slater's there at 11, sign me up.
Fair enough. So, yeah, draft coming up this week. I am super excited. I've been waiting for this all offseason. So, go be sure to follow Dynasty Dorks, watch their live stream. It's going to be a great time. Like you said, Kevin's going to be over there as well. So, it's good. I'm sure you guys are going to have a lot of great guests over there. So, go give them a follow for the actual draft. So, thank you guys so much for listening, and good night.
Did you get all that? If not, make sure you head over to Hammercast.com, subscribe, and join the Hammer Nation. Until next time, keep grinding.